So now we're going to learn how to cast off, and it's pretty simple to do. If you've knitted this far, casting off is going to be very easy for you to do. So casting off is going to give us a finished edge, and it's how we get our stitches off of our needle. So very first thing, you pick up just like you're knitting. Some people slip this first stitch. I like to knit it. I think if you slip the first stitch, you can kind of get a rounded corner up here. So I knit the first stitch. It's over here on my right hand needle. Now I'm going to knit the second stitch, and then I'm going to pick up my first stitch with my left hand needle, and I'm going to bring it over the top of that second stitch that we knitted. So now we have one stitch on our right hand needle. We're going to do that again. We're going to go into the stitch on our left hand needle just like we're knitting it. In fact, we are going to knit it. And we put it over here. It's now on our right hand needle. And now we're going to pick up that very first cast off stitch that's on the right hand needle, and we're going to bring it over the top of the second stitch. Do that again. We're going to knit the next stitch. It's on our right hand needle. We're going to pick the right hand stitch up and bring it over the top of the second stitch. So now you start to see, you get a nice little chain. We'll call it just a little finished edge here. You still want to work on keeping your tension consistent. You don't want it tighter than what you were knitting with. You don't want it looser. So knitting again, pick up that stitch, pull it over the top. Knit into the next stitch, pick up the first stitch, slip it over the top. Knit, pick it up the first stitch, pull it over the top. Knit. I've been pulling my hand back so you could see my stitches, but you really want to keep your work once again down close to the point of your needle. Now, what I am doing, give you some guidance here, is I'm using my, it's hard for me to show you moving my fingers back and forth. This is how I'm moving this needle, is with these fingers over here. So that might give you a little help in, I'm not pulling this way nearly as much as I'm actually moving, gliding my needle back and forth. It's hard to see that a little bit because my hand and the camera don't necessarily work together real well, but let's try that again. So I've knitted that first stitch on my left hand needle. Now I'm picking up this stitch and slipping it over the top is what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's do some more of these. Knit that first stitch on the left needle, pick up the first stitch that we had on the right hand needle, and think about pulling it over the top or bringing that other stitch through, whichever works for your brain. But the goal is you have to get this stitch here over the top of this stitch here, or backwards, this stitch here over the top of this one here. So let's knit into that. We've got the two stitches on our needle here. Get down here to my point, because you can't knit when you're back here. Get down here close, using this index finger to kind of hold these stitches on here so you don't drop them. Go through the first stitch with your left hand needle and bring that stitch through. We'll call that first stitch the cast off stitch. Do that some more. I'm going to do this all the way across the end of our needle. Just keep going with it. Stop and look at your work a little bit. Make sure those all look pretty consistent, that you don't have some big loopy ones. If you do, frog back. Well, how would we frog back? Because now we've cast off. Well, let's look at that. So here's our 2 stitches that we just cast off. Slip your left hand needle through the first stitch, through the second stitch, pull your needle off and pull your yarn out. Pick up that first stitch because that's the cast off stitch, and you've just frogged back 1 stitch. Let's do that again. Put your needle through those 2 stitches. So I can remove this needle. The stitch isn't going to go anywhere because it's secure right here. So that's how you frog back on when you're casting off. So let's pretend we fixed a problem, and we're going to continue to cast off. Get my yarn out here. Some other little advice I'll give you. If this yarn is really slick, so I find myself, even I can get my index finger out here a ways because it's slick and it's hard to keep tension on it in your hand. Sometimes you need to wrap this all the way around your little finger and then finish picking up, and it helps keep this tension so you're not so apt to get your index finger way stretched out. So if you're finding that hard to do, don't just go under your little finger, but go completely around it, like right here, completely around it, and then bring your yarn up and over the rest of your fingers, and that helps on a slick yarn. This is merino wool, and it has a little bit of nylon in it, I believe, but it's very slick. If this was all wool and a different something other than merino, because merino is a very soft, very nice wool, I wouldn't have to do that, but this is just slick enough that it's a little harder to keep the tension right here. In casting off, you want the same kind of tension that you had when you were actually knitting and purling. So we're just going to work our way completely across the top of our project, keeping in mind you kind of want to pull your yarn here so that it doesn't get too tight. And because in casting off, you can get it too tight. So you want to have the same looseness or tension actually in your cast off stitches as you did in your knit stitches. Just a few more to go here. Notice I'm still using my thumb. I'm still using on my left hand, my index finger over here to help guide the needle. So it's working the needles back and forth more than just manipulating your hands in a certain way. I'm moving these needles all the time, slipping them. That's why you don't want your tension so tight, or one of the reasons why you don't want your tension so tight on your yarn that you can't have movement here. If you're doing it that way, you're in trouble and you will struggle with having consistency in your needle, and you will have trouble getting your gauge to match up with the gauge of a knitting pattern when you get into knitting a garment. Now, if you're knitting a scarf, gauge is just not important. Other than whatever your gauge is, you want to be consistent with it. But as soon as you get into knitting a hat, for instance, and you have to make it fit around a head, if your knitting is too tight, you maybe just knitted a child's hat instead of an adult hat. You can ask me how I know that. Learned the hard way. So here we go. We're getting close to the end. We don't do anything different. Just keep the pencils out of your yarn. Keep enough yarn on your ball here that you can have appropriate tension. And I'm going to go back to wrapping that yarn around my little finger because it makes a big difference. I can tell. Just can feel it right away that that yarn is just too loose coming through my left hand. Okay, and remember, speed is not an issue at this point. Well, it never really is an issue. Consistency is definitely what you're looking for in tension, in just everything to be uniform, because elongated stitches will show up real quick. Last stitch. So let's look at this. We've got 2 stitches left. We still need to slip that very first cast off stitch over the next one, and we end up with a loop. Now, what do we do? Well, first of all, I'm going to reach over here and get a pair of scissors. And I'm going to give myself, maybe about that much, 4 inches. Cut the yarn. We still have a loop over here on our right needle. And now what we're going to do is just pull that loop out far enough that we can bring that cut end of yarn through the loop, and then we're going to nicely, gently tug on it, and it's secure. Now we will be, I might not take time right now, but we will weave in this piece of yarn where we ended and this one where we began, and it will weave it in such a way that you won't be able to see it from the back side. Not so important maybe on the sample here, but just let's talk about, this is why you want to block, is so that this all lays down. This piece is blocked. See, it lets it relax and lay down flat. You can block by steaming with your steam iron. I don't suggest putting the iron down on it. I do that occasionally, but you can also burn your fingers. And I like to just put it in some tepid water, let it soak. For a piece like this, I'd let it soak for maybe 10 minutes for this to, the wool to really get fully absorbed. And then I block it by laying it out. Don't overstretch it, but I would even out. My tension was a little bit tight when I started on the corners here. Not paying as close of attention as I should, but that kind of thing blocks right out and relaxes, and you'll have a nice square. Then I pin it. I have blocking pads that they're a styrofoam, well, not styrofoam, but some kind of foam, and made just for this. It's got grid marks on it, and I will block this piece so it lays flat, and And then at the end here, I'm going to post a written out instruction as to just exactly what we did. Now, once you get here, you can pat yourself on the back. You completed your first knitting sample.